I'm Brittany Absher, and this is the proof of plant-based living. It's the story of how food can change our lives, the power of nutrition. With the T. Colin Campbell Center for Nutrition Studies and Armstrong Neighborhood Channel, we'll unravel the complex mystery of why health eludes some and embraces others. Americans need to know the truth. Through expert interviews, we'll uncover the research explaining why we're unnecessarily sick, why we're dying early despite trillions spent in healthcare, and why a system that's supposed to help us often hurts us. And we'll share stories of hope, those who took back their health simply by changing their diet, reversing heart disease, diabetes, and even cancer. The evidence is clear. The key to a long, healthy life is in breakfast, lunch, and dinner. I want to welcome everyone to episode 4 of the Proof of Plant-Based Living. I am Brittany Absher, and today we are diving into the topic of heart disease, which is the #1 killer of men and women in America. I'm really excited for today's guest because I've been studying his work for years now. Dr. Caldwell B. Esselstyn Jr. has been a surgeon, a researcher, a clinician at the Cleveland Clinic for more than 35 years. He's accumulated several prestigious awards for his work. He documents his research in his book, the best-selling book, Prevent and Reverse Heart Disease, and has written more than 150 scientific publications. He also serves as director of the Cardiovascular Prevention and Reversal Program at the Cleveland Clinic Wellness Institute. So, Dr. Esselstyn, thank you so much for joining me today. I want to start with this. You say coronary artery disease, the most common form of heart disease, which is responsible for, of course, heart attacks, need never exist. And if it does exist, it need never progress. So that's an interesting statement to make, especially in a country where it is the #1 killer of men and women. So talk about that.
Well, first of all, I think it's important to recognize that we have known perhaps for over 90 or 100 years that there are multiple cultures on the planet Earth where cardiovascular disease is virtually non-existent. For example, if you decided that you were going to hang out your shingle as a cardiac surgeon in Okinawa, rural China, Central Africa, the Papua Highlanders in New Guinea, or the Tarahumara Indians in northern Mexico, forget it. You better plan on selling pencils. Why? They don't have cardiovascular disease. Why? They all thrive on whole food, plant-based nutrition. And that was really sort of the basis for the studies that I got involved in, as we progressively have learned that where cardiovascular disease, and this is where all experts would agree, where cardiovascular disease has its inception, its onset, its beginning, is when we progressively injure the life jacket and the guardian of our blood vessels, which happens to be that delicate innermost lining called the endothelium. Mm-hmm. And it is the endothelium that manufactures a truly magic molecule of gas, nitric oxide. And it is nitric oxide which is responsible for the salvation, preservation, and protection of all of our blood vessels because of the remarkable functions that nitric oxide has. For example, nitric oxide will keep all the cellular elements within our bloodstream flowing smoothly like Teflon rather than Velcro. Mm-hmm. Nitric oxide is the strongest blood vessel dilator in the body. You climb stairs, the arteries to your heart, the arteries to your legs, they widen, they dilate. That's nitric oxide. Number 3, nitric oxide will protect the wall of the artery from becoming thickened, stiff, or inflamed, protect us from getting high blood pressure or hypertension. Number 4 is the absolute key. A safe and normal amount of nitric oxide will protect us all from developing blockages or plaque. So literally, whether you are from London, Berlin, Chicago, New York, or Spain, mm-hmm. If you have cardiovascular disease, it is because by now, in the previous decades, you have so sufficiently compromised, injured, trashed, and turned your endothelial system into an absolute train wreck, that you no longer have enough nitric oxide remaining to protect you from making blockages in plaque. However, the good news is this is not a malignancy. This is a benign foodborne illness. And once you can get patients to understand that they never, never, ever again must they pass through their lips a single morsel that is going to further destroy an already train-wrecked endothelium, because then the endothelium begins to recover, makes enough nitric oxide so we can not only halt disease progression, but we often see elements of disease reversal. So what are the foods that every time they pass our lips, we injure endothelial cells? They're going to love this in Spain. Any drop of oil.
Yeah, that's a big one.
Olive oil, corn oil, soybean oil, safflower oil, sunflower oil, coconut oil, palm oil, oil in a cracker, oil in a piece of bread, oil in a salad dressing. Oil injures endothelial cells, as does anything with a mother or a face. Meat, fish, chicken, fowl, turkey, and eggs. Also, anything that is dairy, milk, cream, butter, cheese, ice cream, and yogurt. And we don't like sugary drinks, Diet Colas, Pepsi, or Coke, and avoid sugary foods because sugar injures endothelial cells. Cakes, pies, cookies, stevia, agave, excesses of maple syrup, molasses, and honey. My heart patients, I do not like nuts, peanut butter, nut butters, cashew sauce, or avocado. And finally, no coffee with caffeine. Decaf, yes. Black tea, green tea, yes, but coffee with caffeine injures endothelial cells.
Yeah. I love that one of the first things you brought up was the oil, because I think that that's a really hard one for people to accept, especially these days, because we hear so much. It's almost like they're broken down into these good oils, bad oils. The American Heart Association even has them listed on their website as what oils that are good for your heart. And you're saying that they're all the same. And in fact, telling people, read the packages of the crackers that you're buying and make sure that there's not even oil in that.
Has the American Heart Association or the American College of Cardiology ever put together a diet that will take patients seriously ill with heart disease and reverse their disease? No. I mean, here are the landmark organizations that are supposed to be supporting this disease, but they can't put forth a diet like those multiple planets, like those multiple cultures on the planet where they don't have heart disease. They haven't come around with that yet. So I'll be happy to disagree because we will compete our results with anybody on the planet.
Yeah. And you have tested those results. In fact, if this study that you did back in the 80s were for a drug, I think it would be so much more well known, but it's not. And so talk about this study. I think you took 21 patients, at least at first. Some of them did back out of there. And you saw these amazing results, not with a drug, but by changing them to a plant-based diet. What did you find?
Well, it was interesting that this group, my late brother-in-law used to refer to them as Essie's Walking Dead. These 24 patients, they had failed their first or second bypass. They had failed their first or second angioplasty. They were too sick for these procedures, or they had refused. And there were 5 that were told by their expert cardiologists they wouldn't live out the year. Those 5 made it for 20 years. And the thing that kind of really concerned me at the outset, because here I was a general surgeon with this idea that if you could change the diet, you could halt this disease. How would I be able to get adherence or compliance to this very significant nutritional change? So I used the same mantra for this group that I used for my cancer patients that I had used years ago. I learned it from Bert Dunphy, who was a wonderful surgeon on the West Coast. And Bert used to say that patients with cancer are not afraid to suffer, and patients with cancer are not afraid to die. but patients with cancer are afraid of being abandoned by their family or by their physician.
Mm-hmm.
So for the first 5 years, I saw every one of these patients every 2 weeks in the office. We checked their cholesterol, blood pressure, pulse, and their weight. And I would go over every morsel they ate.
Mm-hmm.
At the end of 5 years, I got a little more courageous. We saw them once a month. Most cardiologists will see their patients twice a year. And by the 10th time, after 10 years, they were pretty well on autopilot. So I was able to see them quarterly. Then at 12 years, we went ahead and reported the study. And that 12 years, that's as long a study as I think that anyone has ever done with this disease, because it's almost half a career.
Mm-hmm.
And it was very exciting to see how they stopped any disease progression. And when we carefully studied them, there were often elements of disease reversal, which was practically unheard of. And of course, with all due respect to my cardiovascular colleagues, it turns out that suddenly I was an enormous threat to medicine's biggest cash cow.
Yeah.
Because we now know what we learned early was that patients who are told they have to have a stent or they have to have a bypass, they will adhere to our program. They never have to have those interventions, because you can die getting a stent. You can get a heart attack getting a stent. You can get a stroke with bypass. You can die getting bypass. You can have a heart attack with a bypass. And those are enormously expensive procedures. But 46% of Medicare is cardiology. Yeah, huge amount of money. So that was the first group. We changed it for the second group a little bit. And because one of the criticisms that we had was that some doctors would try to do our method and they say, I can't get a patient to adhere to this kind of nutrition. I said, well, wait a minute. Let me ask how you do this. And he said, well, Dr. Esselstyn, you have to understand, I'm very busy. So I said, you get 10 or 15 minutes, right? I said, look, if you're going to have a patient make a lifestyle change, we found out you have to show the patient respect. And the only way that I know to show a patient respect is to give them my time. So at the present time, I do conduct an intensive counseling seminar. Usually now it's all virtual. Mm-hmm. And we do this once a month, usually no more than 18 or 20 patients. It's going to be a single day, 5.5 hours. They're going to learn all about how they have created their disease and precisely how we are going to empower them as the locus of control to halt and reverse their disease. Mm-hmm. And so with these 5.5 hours, in addition to my presenting the science over about 3.5 hours, Anne will present over an hour and a half, 30 years experience acquiring plant-based foods, dealing with reading ingredients, travel, and restaurants. Then we always have one or two local participants who've had a previous successful experience share their story with those in attendance, who can then say to themselves, listen, if he or she can do this, I can do this. And then I should add, my secretary will give me the names and the phone numbers of everybody coming to our monthly seminar, usually 2 weeks beforehand. And since I'm a little old-fashioned, I insist on personally calling each of those patients so I can put my arms around their story, mm-hmm. and give them an opportunity to ask questions of me, so that when they do come to the seminar, we have a strong platform from which we can all move forward.
Yeah. That's one thing I've noticed is, we do hear a lot that doctors are nervous about introducing this to their patients because they don't think that they'll accept it. And it can be difficult to adopt it, especially if you're at that point in heart disease where you do have to restrict even those things that you mentioned, like the nuts and the avocados and stuff like that. It can be very restrictive. How do we get that out of their mentality, so to speak?
Very easily, because by the time I've had 3 hours with these patients, mm-hmm. I've probably spent an hour. I spent an hour on two words, the endothelial cell and nitric oxide.
Mhm.
Everybody is going to be who's had a heart attack, for example, will suddenly realize they themselves created the heart attack by the foods they ate, which destroyed their endothelial capacity to make enough nitric oxide to protect themselves. So anybody with a brain in their head after 3 hours of hearing how this is, because I try to simplify the science, don't get into all the real fine little details. Endothelial cell nitric oxide, because if somebody realizes that they created their disease by destroying their endothelial cells, why would they ever want to go to a restaurant and say, sweetheart, it's our anniversary, let's destroy some more of our few remaining endothelial cells? What?
Yeah, that's a good point. I'd love to know how we prevent this even further before it gets to this point, because so many people don't think about it until they're at that stage where they're calling you because they've done this.
Until it is taught in the second and third and fourth grade in school, you can teach kids about the endothelial cell and nitric oxide. You can.
Mm-hmm.
You can do this. Imagine then that a kid comes home and says to his parents, hey, Dad, today I learned in school how Grandpa died.
That's pretty provocative.
What?
Yeah.
That's it. What's that? What's the endothelial? And when the day comes when every cardiologist, or 90% of them, or maybe 60%, will insist on their patients being plant-based, then my goodness, and suddenly here you go with that old story about herd immunity.
Mm-hmm.
When enough people realize that they're crucifying themselves on the cross of processed food and oils and sugar, then it's I'm sure I am optimistic that that's going to happen.
That's good news. And yeah, I think it's so important for parents, especially, to know this, is that you've looked at this research where you've seen that if pretty much for all of us that were brought up on the standard American diet, we have evidence of coronary heart disease from a pretty young age. Is that right?
You're talking about yes, there's a wonderful autopsy study. First, when we autopsied our GIs who died in Korea, at an average age of 20, 80% of these young guys already had gross evidence of coronary artery disease you could see without a microscope. Now, that study was repeated 45 years later. Mm-hmm. This time, looking at young women and men between the ages of 17 and 34 who had died of accidents, homicides, and suicides. Now the disease is ubiquitous, everybody. So is it any great surprise that if they have the disease when they're late teenagers and suddenly that we in their 40s and 50s, we see this tsunami of cardiovascular disease? Yeah.
But we've also seen research, and Dr. T. Colin Campbell looked at this when he was studying in China, where he looked at these rural areas and he looked at the death certificates, and not one of them died of a heart attack.
250,000 in was it Wanzhou or one of those? Yes, I know Colin has shared that with me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's such a big difference. So why don't we know this? Why isn't it so in our face every day that there are parts of the world where people never see this and it's our number one killer?
Well, right now, I'd say when people have asked me why cardiovascular medicine doesn't do this, well, that the excuse they'll use is that patients won't follow. Well, that's absolute nonsense, because it's not that the message is wrong. It's really how the message is articulated. We proved this time and again. We have over several thousand patients that are following this program. Come on. So they will do it. It's just a question of how how you orchestrate the message. And the other thing that we really can't overlook, and I must say I've resisted this for years, but now I think the evidence is so clear.
Mm-hmm. It's amazing.
Compare what you get paid for doing a stent or doing bypass surgery compared with talking to somebody about Brussels sprouts and broccoli.
Mhm. We could wipe out a lot of national debt if we switched to this prescription, couldn't we?
Oh, absolutely, we would. Look at all these ridiculous costs that we have for Medicare and elsewhere. Come on, yeah.
Yeah, and you actually, and when I was taking my certification for plant-based nutrition, you have this interesting prescription, I would say, for patients who are pretty, severe along in their heart disease. And what you recommend is not pills. It's you go to the grocery store, you get a ton of greens, and you eat it 6 times a day. But what you're also saying is that you want these patients to chew those greens. So talk about that. Why is that so important?
Well, by now your audience understands the importance between the endothelial cell and nitric oxide. Mm-hmm. And interestingly enough, that is age dependent. You never heard of a boy or girl at age 8 having a heart attack. Well, they've got nitric oxide coming out of their ears. Mm-hmm. But even if they're beautifully healthy at age 50, you now have 50% of the nitric oxide production from the endothelial cell that you had when you were 25. And by the time you're 80, you've lost 70% from your endothelial cell. So about 10 years ago, we took advantage of 2 things. One, we wanted a way to sort of further stimulate the endothelial cell to keep producing more nitric oxide, and also simultaneously taken advantage of the newer research of the last 12 years that has shown us that mankind has an alternate pathway for making more nitric oxide. So here's what we do. I ask these patients to chew 6 times a day a green leafy vegetable that is roughly the size of half of their fist, after it has first been boiled in water 5.5 to 6 minutes, so it's really nice and tender. Mm-hmm. Then they must anoint it with several drops of a delightful either balsamic or rice vinegar. Why? Because research has shown us that the acetic acid from those vinegars will stimulate the nitric oxide synthase enzyme contained within the endothelial cell that is responsible for making nitric oxide. So these patients are then going to chew this green leafy vegetable alongside their breakfast cereal, again as a mid-morning snack, again with your lunch and sandwich, that's 3, mid-afternoon 4, dinner time 5, and of course I adore it when you have that evening snack of arugula or kale. Now, the second benefit from chewing the greens is it restores the capacity of your bone marrow to once again make the endothelial progenitor cell. What do? The endothelial progenitor cell will replace your senescent, injured, worn out endothelial cells. The third benefit, and this is the absolute key, the third benefit of chewing a green leafy vegetable is you are chewing a green nitrate. As you chew this green nitrate, it is going to mix with the facultative anaerobic bacteria that reside in the crypts and grooves of your tongue. Those bacteria are going to reduce that nitrate that you are chewing to a nitrite. Now, when you swallow the nitrite, it is your own gastric acid, which further reduces the nitrite to more nitric oxide, which can enter your nitric oxide pool. So think about it. Mm-hmm. Literally, from dawn to dusk, morning to night, all day long, you are absolutely restoring nitric oxide, the very molecule, the deficiency of which gave you this disease in the first place. Now, there is a caveat. Toothpaste with fluoride, public drinking with fluoride, or mouthwash will injure these beneficial bacteria in your mouth, and we do not like patients to take antacids because antacids will reduce your gastric acidity and you will be unable to reduce the nitrite to more nitric oxide. Now, what are the green leafy vegetables that I'm talking about? They are Bok choy, Swiss chard, kale, collards, collard green, beet greens, mustard green, turnip greens, Napa cabbage, Brussels sprouts, broccoli, cauliflower, cilantro, parsley, spinach, and arugula and asparagus. And the top six are kale, Swiss chard, spinach, arugula, beet greens, and beets. And look what it does for your memory.
Yeah, look at you. You just rattled them off as quick as you could. Is this something that you recommend to everyone? Like, should a patient in their 30s be eating these greens 6 times a day like that? Or is this for people?
If it's a patient with heart disease, yes.
Okay.
No, but if you don't have heart disease, I wouldn't say that. Well, I think you should have some greens, but you don't have to do it as I mentioned.
Okay. So this is if you're at that stage where we're trying to really reverse this at this point.
If anybody's got heart disease, I want them to do this. I mean, I want them to succeed. Look, we have had, maybe you looked on my website, but you can see some striking examples of disease reversal either on the angiogram, disease reversal on the pulse volume of the leg, disease reversal on the ultrasound of the carotid artery to the brain. Not only stopped it, but we can often see evidence of reversal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's amazing stuff. You know,
they cannot get every now. I mean, this morning I had a call, and a woman from Long Island who had heart disease, and she said, "Well, Dr. Esselstyn, how about on the anniversary or on a birthday?" And I said, "Well, wait a minute. Let's think about what you said. First of all, I said you've had a heart attack, and you've got 50% blockages of the arteries going to your brain, and what you're asking me is." Because it's not going to be just the anniversary. It's going to be Christmas. It's going to be New Year's. It's going to be Memorial Day. It'll be on the weekends. Why would anybody with a brain in their head want to further destroy the endothelial cell and have more disease? So I'm a little bit hard boiled on that one.
Yeah. Yeah. You want people to take it seriously. You know, you have a lot of perks being married to Anne, and I can see her back there cooking, and you know, she's an amazing chef. I followed some of her recipes, and she's great. People, you know, they get so caught up in the stuff you were just talking about. You know, how do I learn to cook this way when I never did it before? What about going out to eat? Can I still do that? How do you guys handle that situation?
Well, yeah, when you want to go out to eat, you don't sit there studying the menu when the waiter or the waitress comes. Mm-hmm. You turn in your chair. You look the waiter or the waitress directly in the eye, and you say, "Understand this. I am deathly allergic to a drop of oil." Oh my goodness. So they sit down with you, go over the menu. Of course, it's all filled with oil. So you say calmly, "I'd like to talk to the chef." Chef comes out. You explain to the chef, "I can't have a drop of oil, no animal protein, no dairy, no sugar." Chef smiles, comes back 20 minutes with a plate of beans and rice, or it might be a baked potato with a vegetable. Mm-hmm. But going to a restaurant is never an indication to destroy more endothelial cells.
Do you do this when you go out to eat? How does the chef take?
Well, I'll be honest with you. I don't find us going out very often. But when we do, that's what happens.
And the chef takes it pretty well. I mean, most of them are pretty.
Yeah, they're flattered.
Yeah. So we shouldn't be afraid to ask those questions. I mean, if you have really, you know, if you're allergic to shellfish or something like that, we're never afraid to make it a point to say, please don't get this anywhere near my food. So we should be able to say that when it comes to oil as well.
I remember, it must be about 15 or 16 years ago, I had received an invitation to make a presentation at the American Culinary Institute in the Hudson River Valley, a very prestigious place. And once I got there, before I started, the director suddenly realized who I was and what I was going to say, mm-hmm. and he canceled the presentation. And but he wanted us to have a meal with him, mm-hmm. and one of his other administrators, but he wouldn't let me talk to the chefs. That just shows you how.
Right.
Yeah.
That's pretty unbelievable. And, you know, one thing I think is, you talked about being so involved with your patients. And I've heard this over and over again because I've talked to some of your patients where you're available to them and they've found your work and they've called you. And, that's just something you don't see a lot with doctors. And because you've talked to so many people, what are the biggest misconceptions about heart disease that you find people repeating over and over again?
Well, sometimes they get a little bit too wrapped up in the numbers. Mm-hmm. And I think, if only my cholesterol had been thus and so, or I frequently get a call from a man who may be 50, 55 years old. Says, Dr. Esselstyn, I don't know why I'm calling you. I have absolutely no business having this disease. Ever since I left high school, I've gone to the gym 5 times a week. Well, fine. You've got big, strong, attractive muscles, but your heart vessels are rotten because you've been, eating the wrong foods. So exercise is a bonus. I'm not against it at all. I think it's wonderful, but nothing trumps food in terms of protecting yourself from cardiovascular disease. And of course, smoking cigarettes is out. Patients with diabetes, especially if there's type 2 and they've acquired diabetes along the way when they're in their late 30s, 40s, 50s, you got to really do everything you can to try to have them eat in a way when they drop weight, they may often greatly ameliorate or even often get rid of their diabetes, because diabetes is like pouring gasoline on the fire with heart disease. Right. And it's such a common misconception about what causes heart disease with cholesterol. I mean, why is it that some patients who've carried a cholesterol level of 220 all their lives, and let's look at Okinawa, rural China, the Papua Highlands. What about the people in those countries that have a liver with the thermostat on it that it tends to make 220 as a cholesterol? It's fine as long as they're eating in a way that their endothelial lining of the artery has become an endothelial fortress. Mm-hmm. So I don't care if you've got a few extra molecules of cholesterol going through your bloodstream, providing that you have absolutely made yourself without any cracks, fissures, openings in the endothelial cell, where the cholesterol then seeps through and begins to set up housekeeping with oxidative inflammation and developing plaque. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think a lot of people, because we're not doctors and researchers, we don't really know where cholesterol comes from either. It's an important point to make that, we make our own cholesterol, we make what we need, and the rest we get from animal products. Is that right?
Yeah, we make all we need. You shouldn't have to eat cholesterol by all. You don't need it. Cholesterol is essential because every single cell membrane in the body is made of cholesterol, and it's the basis of vitamin D. It's the basis for many of our sex hormones. It's the base. I think the basic model is called the cyclopentanoperhydrophenanthine nucleus. But whoever wants to remember that, that's basic of cholesterol, and you just throw on these attachments to get these other configurations of it.
Yeah. And here's 2 misconceptions that I hear a lot when I talk to people, about, because I get questions about my diet a lot. And one of them is, and you sort of touched on this a second ago, but some people will say, well, I'm on cholesterol medication and mine's perfect. It stays perfect no matter what I eat. So what are your thoughts when you hear those kinds of statements?
That's a joke, because what happens, I don't care if you're on these statin drugs or not, if you're just eating, because statins have been around for what, over 24 years. And no, more than that. But where's the epidemic of heart disease? Has it gone away? No. Why? What we have found in this seminar, we are many patients, before they ever come to the seminar, they know that they cannot take a statin drug. It's give them miserable muscle cramps. It has injured their liver. it has given them diabetes or it's given them brain fog. But even those persons who don't take statin drugs, when they follow the program, they do absolutely just as well as those who are taking statin drugs.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I also hear a lot that my cholesterol level is hereditary. I'm sure you hear that as well.
Well, but I would say that probably in 90% or 100% of those situations, they've never been eating plant-based. They have no idea of how it can go lower,
Mm-hmm.
and your liver will make what your body requires. But yeah, even those that have this family history business, everybody in that family history has been eating the horrible Western diet, which has given them this disease. And when somebody says, "Oh, my whole family going back, we all have heart disease." Yeah, but your whole family going back, they've always been crumbling their endothelium with the food they've eaten. And when they crumble the endothelium, where's the nitric oxide?
Mm-hmm. So that's where the hereditary comes into play. Yeah, it might be you've seen this in your family members previously, but that's because you all ate the same way.
Yeah.
Interesting stuff. What are your thoughts on one thing we hear a lot lately is that fish oil can really be great for your heart and we should be taking fish oil supplements. What do you think?
That was a study that came out, and then it was immediately, within a number of months, counteracted mm-hmm. by another study similar that did not show that benefit. And it was because in the first study, they were comparing the results of those taking fish oil with another group, but the placebo group was taking an agent that made it less favorable for them. So, yeah, I mean, this worship of fish oil, is that what the Okinawans are taking? Mm-hmm. Is that what they do in rural China? Is that what they're doing in Central Africa, where they never have heart disease? Are they all taking fish oil? No. What has fish oil got in it? PCBs, mercury, and dioxin. And also, the more we fish the oceans by bulldozing them, we don't fish the oceans now, we bulldoze them. Mm-hmm. As the oceans are destroyed, the planet is destroyed. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can't really get excited about fish oil. What are they getting? What are they getting from it? Omega-3, fine. Mm-hmm. You can get omega-3 algae without fish oil, or you can get lots of omega-3 through chia seeds, flaxseed meal, and green leafy vegetables.
Yeah, there are a lot of, and it's less expensive to do it that way, really. So how do we get people more on board? I mean, we are seeing, and you said we're seeing a shift here, and that's great news, but it's still very, new for a lot of people, and it's very hard for people to give up what they're so used to and comfortable with. How do we change that?
Well, I've always felt that it was going to be changed by education. Mm-hmm. And in 1991, I was getting results, and I had seen the results that Dean Ornish had and Colin Campbell studies. And I put together a thing called the First National Conference on the Elimination and Prevention of Cardiovascular Disease in Tucson, Arizona. We had 100 people. We had a wonderful faculty, but I had naively expected this great groundswell. Boy, was I naive. So I said, I'll do this one more time. It took a tremendous amount of work. And in 1997, this time down at Epcot in Disney, mm-hmm. we had 500 attendees and a wonderful blue ribbon faculty. And again, that was more education. And so that was one study on plant-based foods in 91, another one in 97. But now what finally has happened is there are probably at least now 7 or 8 times a year, you will find a nice immersion or a study on plant-based nutrition, which is really gathering some momentum among a certain group. I grant you, it's still quite small in the overall pattern, but it's so different now than it was 34 years ago. And so education is the key, the education of doctors and the education of the public. But it's hard. It's hard when you're taking away things that people love. When people love dairy, they love animal protein, they love oil. I mean, they have that the taste is pretty strong, pretty powerful, and that they have to be sure that the benefits are going to warrant them giving that up.
Yeah. It does take some dedication to retrain your taste buds and retrain your brain. And you say about 3 to 4 months, you have to really stick to this to.
Yeah, it does. What you're doing is you are down regulating your fat receptor and the sugar receptor in your brain. And that down regulation, that's why it's so important when people start out to really do it cold turkey, because if you decide every weekend, well, gosh, I was good all week long, I'm going to belly up to the trough on the weekend, then the receptor just doesn't ever really get a chance to be readjusted.
Is that how you did it? I mean, you went plant-based, was it back in the 80s? Am I correct there?
April 84.
Okay. So during the study that you were doing with your patients, you did it pretty much right along with them.
Oh, I did it before them.
Okay.
Clear, yeah.
So yeah, because that study started in 85, so a year before. So did you go cold turkey? How was that for you? What changes did you notice immediately?
Well, I noticed that Anne was really challenged because we didn't have any books that we could look at. They told us how to make recipes that were plant-based. And so I never could have done this without Anne being so courageous and willing to experiment and with me and with everybody as we went along our way. And then, of course, you suddenly saw others picking up, and you just, find a recipe here, a recipe there. And now in my book, there's over 140 recipes, the same in Anne and Jane, my daughter and my wife's Preventive Reverse Heart Disease Cookbook, plus Neil Barnard's book, plus John McDougall. They're just more and more really of delicious available recipes that are legal.
Yeah, we're lucky now that we have places to turn when we're doing this.
What do you have where you are? Where are you?
I'm in Pittsburgh, PA. Yeah, and we're fortunate here. We've got a great organization here that, you can go to for resources, Plant-Based Pittsburgh. We have a few restaurants. None of them, of course, are oil-free because we don't see restaurants like that yet. Hopefully that's somewhere in the future, but we see some vegan ones popping up. So when we talk about a low-fat diet too, this is another thing where I think you disagree with the American Heart Association, because they say 30% or less of calories from fat, but you say that it should actually be lower than that. Is that right?
Actually, I don't. Yeah, it ends up. We've had our diet tested a number of times, and it's somewhere between 10 and 11% fat. And I never tell a patient what percentage of fat to have. Okay. Because eating has to be a gloriously spontaneous. You can't eat by a calculator. It has to be a glorious, spontaneous event. And I don't want people to be all tied up in knots. Although some people, it's just their nature. They tend to be that compulsive about it. But just know the foods that are not going to hurt you. Avoid the ones that are going to hurt you. And then you'll find many, many, many recipes available. Yeah, it seems complicated at first, but really you just need to know what's benefiting your body and what's not. And I want to get your thoughts too, because you see so many people turning to this diet now, and it's a little scary when I see my friends and family doing it, is the keto diet. What are you seeing in those patients? Because that is a high fat diet. See, yeah, what you see in those patients is high fat diet and a progression of disease. And often I'll see patients who come to me and say, when I realized I had some heart disease, I heard about this keto diet. It sounded just like I eat all those wonderful foods. I said, yeah, but the trouble is there's never been a single study that I'm aware of with patients who are seriously ill with cardiovascular disease, go on a keto diet and have their disease halted and reversed. Doesn't exist. And no, the keto diet has just got all the wrong foods. It's really if you like meat and cheese.
Right. I know. That's what I say. I can't really support a diet that promotes bacon over fruit. It doesn't make sense. So I guess my last question here is, what are you having for lunch today? Or did you already eat lunch? I see Anne back there doing stuff, and I just am curious what you're having.
I think she had a salad set up for us to go kind of light on lunch, but I haven't eaten it. Yeah, I haven't eaten the salad yet.
You haven't had this yet. So on a typical day, what do you usually eat?
Well, I like a breakfast that has old-fashioned Quaker oats. I wet it down with oat milk, and I have raisins, banana, and raspberries, blueberries, strawberries, and blackberries. And sometimes I add a banana. I mean, that certainly holds me very well. Well, lunchtime, it's in the wintertime. Anne has these wonderful soups that are kind you can walk on. They're thick, and probably then with a bagel, and then at supper time, like tonight, we're going to have my favorite, beans and rice.
Good one.
With all these wonderful toppings of tomatoes, peppers, chestnuts, corn, peas. I mean, it's an absolute feast.
Yum. And that's your request a lot of nights for dinner?
Yes, for sure.
Yeah. And I've seen when you and Colin get together, you have some pretty lovely looking meals.
Oh yeah. Yeah, Karen is great too. She knows the drill.
Yeah. Well, Dr. Esselstyn, it was so nice to talk to you, and an honor for me to be able to speak with you.
Let me close by saying one thing. First of all, I guess the reason that I'm so optimistic about really what the future holds, I think there can be a seismic revolution around the corner in health. And the seismic revolution that is going to occur will never come about with the invention of another pill, drug, procedure, or operation. The seismic revolution will come about when we in the profession have the will and the grit and the determination to share with the public what is the lifestyle, and most specifically, what is the nutritional literacy that will empower them as the locus of control to absolutely annihilate chronic illness.
I love that. That's a really positive note to end on. And really, that's something I wish so many people would grab hold of, is that your health does not depend on a pill or the latest technology. It's in your hands. You have a lot more control than you think you do.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you so much, Brittany.
Thank you, Dr. Esselstyn. It was great to talk to you again. Dr. Esselstyn's book is Prevent and Reverse Heart Disease. You can follow him and his whole family online. You saw Anne back there, his daughter Jane, also really involved in this. Your son Rip, very involved. I love all of them. So definitely look them up. And next time when we do our episode of Proof of Plant-Based Living, we're actually talking, Dr. Esselstyn, to a woman who followed you. You spoke to her, counseled her after her heart attack where she nearly died, and she changed her diet, and she's been having just amazing results reversing her heart disease. So we'll hear from her next. Thank you so much for joining us today. We'll see you next time.